Hopkinsville is in Christian County in western Kentucky. It is about 15 miles from the Tennessee border, and in 1955, the population was about 26,000. The town thrived on agriculture, and the city was prosperous and flourishing. This was stimulated by the proximity of Fort Campbell, a U.S. Army military base that housed thousands of U.S. troops in training before and after World War II. Kelly, Kentucky, was about 7 miles north of Hopkinsville and was extremely rural, with only a few homes, most still without power or utilities of any sort. This was the state of the Sutton farm on that infamous, hot, muggy, humid August night in 1955.
11 people were in the home that night. The permanent residents were Mrs. Langford, J.C. Sutton, his wife Aileen, and their 3 children. Visiting were Aileen's brother O.P. Baker, who lived in Hopkinsville, and J.C.'s brother Elmer Sutton, who went by Lucky, and his wife Vera. Lucky was on break from his work with the traveling carnival and brought along his friend Billy Ray Taylor and his wife June. Of the 11, 10 of them reported seeing the creatures that attacked the farm that night. June was the only one who didn't see them, as she was too frightened and refused to look.
The incident started at about 7:30 p.m. when Billy Ray Taylor decided to go out to the well to get a drink of water. As he stood at the well, bringing up the bucket, he saw something very unusual. Approaching from the southwest, about 30 to 40 feet overhead, was a silvery metallic flying saucer with a rainbow-colored exhaust tail. It passed over the house, continued down to the fields, stopped in midair, and then dropped to the ground and disappeared into a gully.
Taylor rushed back and told the family what he'd seen. The family was amused by the story, but passed it off as a joke. No one took it seriously, and no one investigated. If he had seen something, it was nothing more than a shooting star.
About 30 minutes later, around 8 p.m., the dog began to bark. The barking was persistent and violent, so Lucky and Billy went to the back door to see what had gotten the dog so riled up. They watched the dog, usually brave, put his tail between his legs and run under the house. The dog refused to come out from under the house until the next day.
The 2 men then saw a strange glow out in the field that seemed to be approaching the house. As it came closer and closer, they began to see within the glow was a small humanoid creature, unlike anything they had ever seen before. The creature was about 3.5 feet tall, with an oversized round head, arms so long they nearly touched the ground, and huge hands that were pointed at the fingertips like talons. The eyes were large and were glowing yellow. They immediately noticed that the eyes were strangely placed, neither in the front nor on the sides, but about midway on the creature's head. If that wasn't strange enough, the creature was completely covered in skin that appeared silver and metallic. The skin glowed in the darkness, and the creature seemed to be floating in the air, its feet never touching the ground.
As the creature approached the back door with its hands in the air, the men, frightened, retreated into the house and grabbed a 20-gauge shotgun and a .22 rifle. When the creature came within 20 feet of the back door, both men fired. The blast somersaulted the creature backwards, knocking it to the ground. The bullets, however, seemed to have no effect as the creature scrambled upright and darted into the darkness at the side of the house.
Things were quiet for a few minutes, and the men went to the living room to check on the others. Then suddenly, another creature appeared at the side window. The men again fired at the creature, causing it to again somersault and disappear.
The men, wondering if they had hit the creatures, decided to go outside. Taylor went out first, and as he stood under the small overhanging roof about to step into the yard, Aileen Sutton screamed and jerked him back into the house, after seeing a long, claw-like hand reach down from the roof towards him. Lucky jumped through the door and into the yard, turned and blasted the creature with another round from the shotgun, knocking it off the roof. It was then that Billy noticed that there was another creature in the maple tree to the right of the house. Both men shot at this creature, knocking it out of the tree, and both shot at it again, as it didn't fall but floated to the ground. Once reaching the ground, the creature scurried into the weeds. Then, from the northwest corner of the house, right near where Lucky was standing in the yard, came another one.
How many were there? Were the creatures swiftly reappearing? Or were there dozens of them? Why were the bullets having no effect? They had shot and hit the creatures at least 4 times. Lucky pulled up the shotgun and shot the approaching creature point blank. This shot sounded like bullets hitting and bouncing around inside a metal barrel. The creature flipped, got up, and ran again into the darkness, seemingly unfazed.
With the direct shot from the 12-gauge shotgun having no effect, the men decided to retreat back into the house, turning on the porch lights over the front and back doors. Obviously, nothing they were doing was working, and they needed to regroup.
It was at this point that someone noticed that the creatures seemed to not like the light and seemed more hesitant to approach the house except for where it was dark. It was only a matter of minutes before they heard tapping noises and movement on the kitchen roof. The men exited again, shooting the creature off the roof. This creature floated off the roof and then some 40 feet to the property's back fence where it perched. They shot again, knocking it off the fence, causing it to scurry into the underbrush.
With each wave of advance, the family got better and better looks at the creatures. The legs were inflexible and never seemed to bend or suggest any movement or knee joints. The arms were long and only seemed to bend slightly at the elbows. There were no discernible feet, and the creatures seemed to float everywhere they went. Neither the glowing yellow eyes or the head seemed to turn or track any movement. The skin was slightly illuminated in the dark and became more dull and metallic in the light. The glow of their bodies also seemed to increase when they were shot or shouted at. There were other features beginning to come forward as well. They had large triangular ears, floppy and wrinkled. There was no hair or discernible sexual characteristics, no smell, and absolutely no sound. If the creatures had a mouth, they never used it or indicated any pain or displeasure when shot.
Their behavior was also strange. Several times the men thought they had driven them away, only to have them return again. One thing can be said for certain. The creatures were persistent and continued to approach the house multiple times. However, despite their persistence, they never actually showed any signs of aggression or hostility towards the family, even after being shot at multiple times. They never once tried to enter the home, and instead preferred to just stand at the doors and windows looking in. This has led some to speculate that the creature's only motive was curiosity.
The incident continued until around 11 p.m., when the Suttons, in a last-ditch effort to escape the situation, decided to make for their 2 vehicles and drive to the Hopkinsville police station. One of the children had to be carried to the car, sobbing with fear.
The farmhouse sat empty for the next 30 minutes. The time it took for the Suttons to drive to the police station, tell their tale, and for officers to drive back to Kelly to investigate. While the tale was fantastical and the officers were highly skeptical, one thing was certain: there was extreme and genuine fright shown by the Sutton family. Police Chief Greenwell was emphatic.
Something scared those people. Something beyond reason. Nothing ordinary.
He also pointed out that their coming to Hopkinsville at all was significant.
These aren't the kind of people who normally run to the police for help. When they feel threatened, what they do is reach for their guns.
With their guns having no effect, the measure of their fear was the trip to the police station. The officers took immediate action, and the Hopkinsville Police, Kentucky State Police, and the Christian County Sheriff Department all responded to the scene. Also reporting to the scene was a staff photographer for the Kentucky New Era.
Once all the units were on scene, Chief Greenwell initiated a thorough search of the house, yard, and outbuildings, all the while looking for signs of drinking or hoaxing. None was found by the chief or any other investigator.
All in all, the atmosphere was tense. Chief Greenwell stated,
"In and around the whole area, the house, the fields that night, there was a weird feeling. It was partially uneasiness, but not entirely. Everyone had it. There were men there that I'd call brave men I've been in dangerous situations with. They felt it too. They've told me so."
It was clear that everyone was on edge.
One strange thing found at the scene was a luminous patch of grass in the area that the men had shot the creature off the fence. The patch was clearly visible, and the contrast between the grass and the luminous patch was definite. The only other evidence at the scene was the Sutton's fear, numerous shells, and multiple bullet holes. There were no footprints, no spaceship, no blood, and no little men, although no one was brave enough to investigate the gully that night.
Slowly, the investigators began to leave, promising to return at daylight. By 2:15 a.m., the Suttons were left at the farm alone, still frightened and in the dark. As the Suttons attempted to settle in for the night, the creatures returned again.
Mrs. Langford had retired to bed and was trying to go to sleep when she noticed a strange glow coming from the window. As she looked, a creature was standing there, with its hands on the screen, just staring into the room. She looked away and back 3 times, and each time, the creature was still standing there.
She called quietly for the family, and Lucky jumped up immediately, lifting his gun. She pleaded with Lucky not to shoot, as she didn't want the night's events to repeat, but Lucky was not persuaded and fired. It is not known how many shots were fired during that second encounter, but one thing is clear. Just like the first encounter, none of the shots had any effect on the creatures.
The creatures were last seen just before sunrise, around 5:15 a.m. At daybreak, the Suttons were left terrified and exhausted.
By the next morning, the area was buzzing with excitement. The Hopkinsville Police, the Kentucky State Police, the Sheriff's Office, and military representatives from Fort Campbell were all on scene. The hype and excitement caused the area to become flooded with reporters and photographers that showed up from Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. Automobiles blocked the roads, and sightseers swarmed the Suttons' farm. Skepticism was high, and the Suttons were quickly becoming the butt of the jokes.
The sheer number of investigators and reporters on the scene makes the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter one of the most reported UFO events ever. However, those numbers and the lack of control at the scene brings the investigation's integrity into question. For instance, no part of the area was roped off to prevent damage to footprints. Investigators were everywhere and anywhere. There was never any systematic attempt to collect shotgun shells, and no one thought to check the scene for radiation.
The crowds only got thicker the more the news spread. People blocked the roads, stared, pointed, and laughed. A few even entered the home without permission to look around themselves, questioning the family and forcing them to pose for pictures. For the second time, the Suttons were fighting off an invasion. The little men were terrifying, but the human horde was worse.
One important development occurred when Andrew B. Ledworth, a Hopkinsville amateur radio announcer and engineer, sat down with the women and sketched out a drawing of the creatures. I did not lead the women in any way as the picture was drawn. They were extremely positive in what they had seen and what they had not seen. It was a matter of following their directions as to the shape of the face, eyes, hands, and body. If I ever so much as advanced a supposition of how a particular feature might have looked, they were quick to correct me.
The drawings were repeated with the men, and Ledworth ended up with 3 eerily similar sketches, each showing a small creature with a large round head, large offset eyes, large triangular-shaped ears, long arms with claw-like fingers, and short legs. No one was able to give a good description of the feat. It's clear from the sketches why the creature took on the moniker the Hopkinsville Goblins. It was the sensationalized media that dubbed them green.
The next day brought hundreds of sightseers to the property. The Sutton farm was completely overrun. People continued to approach the house, peer into windows, and just walk into the house. People were demanding photos with the family, and entrepreneurs, wanting to take advantage of the size of the crowd, requested to set up food and beverage stands. Multiple times, the state police had to be called in to clear the area, but it was all in vain, with the crowds returning each time. Miss Langford pleaded with the media.
The people are worrying us to death. Please tell them not to come here and worry us.
Despite her pleadings, the crowds continued. The family decided to put up a no trespassing sign, but even that did no good.
It was on this day that a staff photographer for the Kentucky New Era and a reporter handling the story returned to the property. It was during their visit that a photographer noticed a small piece of aluminum foil near the fence where the men claimed to have shot one of the creatures, knocking it off the fence. He pointed it out to the reporter, stating, "Look, there is your little man." This, of course, added to the skepticism of the entire situation.
Despite the skepticism, the lack of evidence, and claims of hoaxing, the family remained true to their story, all the while taking a beating in the public eye. Rumors, counter-rumors, statements, charges, theories, allegations, and speculations were thick in the air, most of them fueled by the fact that the next day the family attempted to charge admission to the property. Perhaps this was in an effort to thin out the crowds and bring some sense of normalcy back to the family. But all in all, it did nothing in the public eye to resolve the family. Whatever the purpose of the admission signs, they were useless as well, and did nothing to stop the sightseers from coming onto the property. There was no way to compel payment for such large crowds, and the property just didn't have the fences, gates, guards, or locks to keep them out. The family absconded to Hopkinsville to stay with some friends, but soon returned to the property in an effort to protect anything they could from souvenir hunters.
With no more appearances of the little green men, creatures, or goblins, and the family's reputation ruined, things in Hopkinsville eventually simmered down. Lack of evidence leaving much of the public believing the events in Hopkinsville were an elaborate hoax. You really can't blame the skeptics. Everything really was against the story.